Okay, I think it's about 7:30. So welcome everybody to this edition of TNC TV. This time we're going to focus on three species that you might find freaky, fascinating, and hopefully fabulous. A couple of programming notes. One, we decided this time if you want to keep your camera on, go for it. It doesn't seem to bother these presenters. They are fearless, and we like seeing your smiley faces. If you are having connectivity problems, though, it's okay to turn your video off because that might help with your own personal connection. As always, though, we would like you to save your questions till the end, but if you just can't forget, you don't want to forget them and you've got something you want to ask while it's hot on your mind, go ahead and press the chat button that you'll see at the bottom of your screen, and you can type it into the side there, and our friendly moderator, Chip Sutton, will collect all of your questions, and at the end of it, he'll help moderate our Q&A discussion. He will also be sending you, actually, I think you'll get an email from Larry Clemens, not from Chip. You'll be getting an email after this is all done with a link to the recording, URL links to more resources, all the questions answered, and a reminder about our last and final program of the spring series of TNC TV. It'll be on Thursday, May 21 at 7 p.m. Thank you all for joining at 7:30 this time. But it'll be at 7 p.m. next time about trees. All bark, no bite. So we'll have a nice fun program about trees in 2 more weeks, and then we'll wrap it up for the spring. But tonight's presentation on freaky, fabulous, or fascinating is going to be moderated by our own Cassie Hauswald. And if you're not familiar with Cassie, I invite you at some point to check out our homepage at nature.org, Indiana. And at the bottom of the page, you'll see this really nice, friendly person here, Cassie, holding up a freshwater mussel. And if you click on this page, you'll go to a feature story all about Cassie that includes a real nice video that she recorded last year that tells you all about her work in the Wabash with freshwater mussel. So I'm going to turn off now and turn on over to Cassie, and she's going to introduce our presenters and take it away. Thanks, Cassie.
Thank you, Melissa. Welcome, everyone. I want to just hop right into the presentation tonight. Thank you for tuning in. I think you will, hopefully by the end of the evening, find these creatures fabulous, even if you feel a little freaky about them right now. So to start us off this evening, our Northeast Indiana Conservation Lands Manager, Nathan Herbert, who has been with the Conservancy for 10 years now, restoring wetlands in Northeast Indiana, is going to talk to us about copperbelly water snakes. And I think you will find, it will come through in his presentation, that Nathan loves snakes, and he thinks from a snake's perspective when he's restoring these habitats. So with that, I will turn it over to Nathan to tell us more about the copperbelly water snake. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. So this is part of a much larger talk that I'm going to get right down to brass tacks on. We're going to focus on this snake here on the right side of the screen, the copperbelly water snake. This is a subspecies of a more common snake, the red-bellied water snake, found in the southern tier states in the southeastern United States. In the north, this snake in Indiana is found down around the sort of the toe of Indiana, around Muscatatuck, and then there's a very, very sort of fragmented population in Northeast Indiana, Northwest Ohio, and Southern Michigan. Estimates for the total number of snakes up here, it's probably less than 150. They are extraordinarily rare and becoming rarer. Well, the reason I talk about this snake is because I am a manager of our preserves up here in Northeast Indiana, and one of my jobs is overseeing the restoration of wetlands at our Douglas Woods Preserve in Steuben and DeKalb counties. And Douglas Woods is going to be within this historical range of the copperbellies in Northeast Indiana here. It's sort of in the core of that range. There are currently no snakes here. It's talked as a potential repatriation site, but you know, that's neither here nor there right now. But even though the snake isn't here at Douglas Woods, the habitat requirements of this snake are a perfect model for our wetland restoration and our habitat management at Douglas Woods. At a large scale level, so if we look, here is Douglas Woods, this large patch of woods in the middle of the figure. There are several sort of remnant ephemeral pools here scattered throughout the woodland, and then we can see on the periphery of the preserve multiple restored wetlands here. Now, the copperbelly at a large scale level requires relatively undisturbed land. We don't normally think of maybe a snake as being what's called an umbrella species, meaning that its habitat requirements sort of going to overarch the habitat needs of a lot of the native species, both terrestrial and aquatic in a particular area, but the copperbelly is definitely an umbrella species. It likes big tracts of forested land. It likes a variety of wetlands, ephemeral wetlands with different hydrologic periods. It prefers these really shrubby wetlands with shallow, long, broad shorelines with emergent vegetation. And it really relies on edges and canopy gaps and disturbance in the canopy. And another thing it doesn't like is roads. So when we think about this area up here, a big tract of undisturbed forested landscape with no roads, there's not a lot of that in the northern half of Indiana. Douglas Woods is about one of the largest tracts. Here's a good example of some copperbelly habitat, and this is one of the wetlands at Douglas Woods. Let me go back. So this wetland here is really sort of our model. When we talk about restoring wetlands, what am I thinking about wetlands to look like in 100 years, long after I'm gone? Well, everything goes right, maybe it'll look something like this. And that's really what guides my management strategy. So the snake itself is this umbrella species. And if we manage for this snake, we can really hit the habitat requirements for a lot of our other species endemic to this region of the state. Maybe not pheasants, but they're not native anyway, so whatever. But we do get to see, we will manage for our warblers and a lot of our songbirds that come through the area, migratory and resident. Other herps, for instance, the rare Blanding's turtle, state endangered Blanding's turtle, blue spotted salamanders and imbistimid salamanders, mole salamanders in general, turkeys, waterfowl, bats, right? All of these organisms, their requirements can be met by sort of modeling our habitat after the needs of the copperbelly. And so Douglas Woods, to give you a little background, it started in 1993. Larry Clemens was an integral player in sort of getting this project started and really almost the purchase of every single acre that is currently under ownership up here by TNC. The wetland restoration work began around 2003, 2004, and some of these older wetlands like we see here didn't really receive a lot of follow-up management. And I've been going in and we'll look at some effort that I've been putting in there to sort of reset those vegetatively and get them up to snuff. And the original goal of protecting of Douglas Woods was not about the snake, it's about protecting Fish Creek and the endangered mussels that are in Fish Creek. We also acquired in 2009, basically another huge parcel of land up here that basically doubled the size of the nature preserve. This is the Holden restoration. And this is when I come into the picture because I was brought on the spring after purchase, and I have been basically managing and guiding these wetlands from the time that they were essentially just busted down ag field, where we've busted tile and 1 or 2 years out of ag, to what we have now. And this picture is like 4 years old. It's way better than this now. To somebody that didn't know what they were looking at, you might not think that this is entirely reconstructed from bare dirt up. And so what I'm doing when I manage these wetlands is it's a lot more than breaking tile. We have to control the invasives. We have to get a diversity of vegetation, native vegetation. We are also adding hard woody structure into the area so that we don't just have this basin. We're trying to get ahead and provide a diversity of structural elements in the habitat. And again, what we're trying to get to Here's some more work that we've done, breaking out willows and sort of opening that up. We can see buttonbush in the back here, which is really important for a lot of different species in these ephemeral wetlands. Adding some woody structure, there's a painted turtle sitting on that log. That log's only been there for a couple months by the time that picture was taken. And here's some more instances of just sort of creating this low emergent shoreline for the snakes, even though they're not here, because that habitat is what basically everything else likes about these ephemeral wetlands. So restoring these wetlands then, by thinking about the copperbelly and thinking about its management needs, it seems like an unlikely candidate. We think about deer, we think about turkeys, we think about trees. We might think about bigger, more charismatic organisms. But if we think about a diversity of a plethora and the diversity of animals of organisms in the region, there are certain species that are perhaps a surprising example. They set a surprising example for what we should structure our habitat restoration after. And this video here, I hope this shows up. I shot this with the drone, and we can see some of these older wetlands at Douglas Woods that I've been busting down willows and cottonwoods and basically just restarting the entire vegetation because it was nothing but cattails and reed canary grass. And if we look out here to the northwest and to the west, we see Douglas Woods itself, the older core section of the preserve. So in 100 years, we hope to go from breaking tile in a restored wetland in an ag field to a mature forest with something that looks a lot like what is behind me in my background. And by considering the habitat needs of a few key species like the copperbellies, whether or not they're here, hopefully we'll achieve that. And that's pretty much what I got. Like I said, I busted this down from a much longer talk. And I have to say that one of the surprising things about my job here was when I got hired on, I had done my research, my graduate research on the habitat needs of this snake. And I think it was about my second or third week on the job, we were looking at some restored wetlands that were basically in their first year of restoration. We had broken tile. And there were some folks around asking like, well, what, you know, they were following this guideline for the copperbelly water snake that I had helped write. And they wondered, has anybody ever seen one? Does anybody know if this is what we need to do? And it just so happened that I, the person that helped write the guidelines for that, was standing right behind him the whole time. And I've had the opportunity to be on both sides of the coin here, researching the requirements and the habitat of the snake, and then also implementing management suggestions that I made from my research. And I think that's been pretty rewarding and one of the more enjoyable aspects of my job.
Thank you, Nathan. I told you guys he thinks like a snake, and that's pretty clear, and it's really great to see the work that's progressing there at Douglas Woods. You made an interesting statement in there about something called herps, and tonight we're talking about reptiles and amphibians. Both of those get grouped into the title herps, and so Nathan was, of course, talking about a reptile, and next we're going to have someone talk to us about an amphibian. So Nick Bergmeyer is an extension biologist with Purdue University. He is focused on hellbenders in the Blue River watershed in southeast Indiana. And he does a lot of research on hellbenders, and he does education as well. So this is his element. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Nick to hear more about hellbenders.
All right. Cassie, you didn't tell your story.
I think it's better after your presentation, after I look through your presentation.
All right.
It has a little more context then.
All right, well, thank you guys. So yeah, today I'm gonna talk to you guys about the hellbender and the stuff that Purdue University and the Indiana DNR are doing to help conserve and bring them back. So one of the first things people usually ask me are, you know, what is a hellbender and how did they get their name? So The Hellbender, the name Hellbender, we think, nobody knows for sure, but the history looks like it came from the settlers. When they first saw them crawling around the streams, they thought that they looked like they were something from hell that was bent on returning. So Hellbender. It's not a very endearing name, but they do have a lot of other names. So one of the more common names is old lasagna sides, and I'll explain that one to you in a second. We've got snot otter, and that's because they live in the water and they're super slimy. They really, if you grab a hold of one, and they feel a lot like somebody just sneezed all over your hands. They're pretty fun. Devil dog, Grampus, which I don't know where some of these came from. Alligator, because they could find them in the Allegheny Mountains, and they look kind of like an alligator. So the Hellbender, it's North America's largest salamander. They can get up to 29 inches long. That's the record. They're usually around about 20 inches long when they're adults, up to 5 pounds, and they're actually the third largest salamander in the world. So there's two others, the Japanese giant and the Chinese giant salamanders. They look just like a Hellbender, only they're like 4 to 5 feet long. They're huge, but otherwise they're all essentially the same. So to kind of identify a Hellbender, some of the key characteristics, they've got this big, you can see the big flat head there. And that big flat head really just helps them. They crawl along the bottom of the stream, and that helps them crawl under rocks. So if you can see on their sides of their body there, they've got these big fleshy folds of skin, and that's actually where they get the old lasagna sides name. The people thought that those looked like lasagna noodles, so old lasagna sides. And those folds of skin actually help them breathe underwater. So they don't have gills as adults. They just absorb the oxygen out of the water, and that's just extra area on their skin to breathe. I mentioned that they're incredibly slimy, and they really are. When you catch them, when you agitate them, they will just start oozing slime. And then they're sexually monomorphic, which just means you can't tell the difference between a male and a female, except for a very brief period of the year during the breeding season. So this is just some of the different life stages of Hellbenders. In the top left, that's the larvae. So that's a pretty recently hatched larvae. And you can see they've got those little gills behind their heads. They actually lose those, and the picture below those are actually still larvae. I meant to put juveniles in there, but those are just about to the point. Those larvae at the bottom left are almost about 1.5 years old, and those gills will disappear pretty soon, and they'll just look like little miniature Hellbenders, which you have in the top right. On the bottom right is a mud puppy, so a lot of people confuse these for Hellbenders. We get a lot of reports of Hellbenders, which usually turn out to be mud puppies. And the main thing that you can tell them apart is that once they get above a few inches, mud puppies always have those gills, but once a Hellbender is about 3 inches long, they'll lose those gills, and that's really the best characteristic. Plus, mud puppies they're not covered in those big folds of skin. So where do Hellbenders live? Hellbenders, they really require the cool, clean rivers and streams. So we have them down here in southern Indiana in the Blue River, and they like those. Like the picture on the left there, they like all the rocks on the bottom of the river. So the gravel and cobble on the bottom and the big rocks. And what they do is the adults, they hide under those giant tabletop sized rocks, and those larvae, like you see in the top right, they like to burrow down in all that gravel and cobble. So this picture in the bottom right, that's a spot where we caught a Hellbender under one of those huge rocks, and that is really what they prefer. So we've got a Hellbender life cycle here. They're pretty unique among amphibians. Most amphibians have part of their life cycle in the water and part of their life cycle on land. But Hellbenders live their entire life in the water. So they're laid, they start out as eggs. The male will pick a big, huge rock, and the females will actually come to him. She'll lay her eggs and she'll leave. He fertilizes the eggs, and he actually takes care of the eggs until they hatch, and even some cases a few months after they hatch. So it takes the eggs about 2 months to hatch. And then there are those little larvae, which they're larvae for about another 2 years, at which point they lose the gills and they just look like the little mini adults. And then it takes them about another 5 years to mature into an adult hellbender. So it takes them anywhere from 6 to 8 years before they're adults, and then they can live up to 25, 30, or even more years. So they're a very long-lived species. Now, unfortunately, hellbenders they've declined throughout most of their range. So the gray areas are their historic range, but the yellow areas are the only areas where you can still really find good, healthy hellbender populations. And you'll probably notice that is mostly in the Appalachian Mountains. But throughout this, they've disappeared from Illinois. They're almost entirely gone from Indiana. They're only found in one river, in the Blue River in southern Indiana, and there's maybe one hellbender in Mississippi. They did find a hellbender about 2 years ago, but that's the only one they found in years. So there just aren't very many left. And there's several reasons for the population decline. So one of the primary reasons is agricultural runoff, mostly in the form of sediment runoff. So I mentioned that the babies really like they like that gravel cobble substrate on the bottom. When all that sediment runs into the river and fills in those spaces, the babies just don't have anywhere left to live, and so they end up dying. And you get these populations with a bunch of really old animals and no babies, and then eventually those populations just blink out. Other causes are dams that really restricts their movement up and down the river, and that's actually a dam that Cassie helped get removed down here in Indian Creek. So that was a big thing, and now we're looking at Indian Creek to potentially put hellbenders back in there now that the dam's gone. And people also really used to like to kill hellbenders. They thought they were poisonous, and they thought they ate all the fish. So you would get areas where they would have hellbender killing contests. So they would get like a whole town together, like the whole group of us in here would go out to the stream, and we would catch as many hellbenders as possible, and we would kill them just to because we didn't want them to eat all our fish. And that graph there is just, that kind of shows the decline. I mean, this is actually, they started declining really back in the 60s, 70s, and this is really just the tail end of the decline here down in just the Blue River. So some of the things that we do at this point to try to help restore hellbenders, we're really actively working with the DNR and the Nature Conservancy, and we have a captive rearing program to reintroduce hellbenders into the Blue River. And so what you see in these pictures, this is how we find our animals and our eggs. So we basically just get a bunch of us go out to the river and do some snorkeling. And what we're looking for is that picture in the bottom left where you see a male poking his head out from under a rock. And what that shows us is that's usually what a male does when he's guarding a nest. And so that's on the bottom right, that's somebody, we're sticking a probe under the rock, and what we're doing is we're trying to hook their eggs. And their eggs are really they come in strands, almost like a strand of pearls. So you can get a little hook on them, and you can pull out one big nest of eggs all at once. And when we do that, we take those eggs back up to one of our zoos that we participate with. So we work with Mesker Park Zoo and Evansville, Indianapolis Zoo, and Fort Wayne Zoo. And we take the eggs and we rear those for about 4 or 5 years before eventually releasing those back into the river. And so this is some shots from one of our hellbender releases. And what you see in the bottom is that's an underwater shot of one of our soft release cages. So we don't just take the hellbenders and throw them out in the river and wish them luck. We do what we call a soft release, which is where we build these big cages that are about the size of a twin mattress. And those are full of, you can see they're full of cobble-sized, boulder-sized rocks. And we put, if you look in the top left, you see that white structure. That's a mesh cage that we put over top of these rock cages. And that mesh cage, we release the hellbenders into them, and that holds them in place for a few days. And then after about 3 days, we take that big white cage off and leave the rock cage, and the hellbenders are just free to come and go as they please. So it just gives them a chance to get used to the river. So a lot of these animals were were raised in captivity sort of experimentally. So what we're trying to do is learn if there are ways we can raise them in captivity in order to increase their survival in the wild. So one of the things that we've done is rear some of our hellbenders in what's essentially an indoor stream, and the other animals are just raised in just kind of standard aquaria conditions, so there's no flow. And we've released those, and we put little transmitters inside of them, so we can follow those around for about a year after we release them and see if one group of animals survives better than the other group. And it does look like the animals that we've reared in the fake stream, it does actually look like those are surviving better. So if those things work, we hope to pass those along to other groups. Now, one of the other things that we are doing is right now we're actually working with the Nature Conservancy and local soil and water conservation districts to kind of do some bigger landscape scale conservation and get some money to work with farmers to implement some conservation practices to hopefully improve the habitat. And so just, I'd like to finish up to talk about a few other ways that anybody can help. One of the main things that we encourage people is if they live right next to a stream, to help reduce runoff, is maybe just leave a couple of strips of unmown lawn right next to the stream, and that helps make sure that your riverbank doesn't fall in, and it helps reduce the runoff into the stream, and which is great for aquatic wildlife, hellbenders and mussels. As best you can, reduce your pesticide use. You don't have to stop, but follow the label and don't spray right on the creek if you can. In a lot of areas, it's not as big a problem around here, but in a lot of areas, especially the parks, people have gotten into this habit of taking rocks out of the stream and building these big cairns on the side of the river, just these rock stacks. And that's kind of fun, but they tend to actually take the rocks that the hellbenders live under. So that what happens is researchers end up going to those areas afterwards, and they find dead hellbenders, and they just kind of deplete the habitat. And then finally, if hellbenders you can catch them if you're fishing, and when they eat, they tend to swallow the hook. They rarely actually get it in their mouth. And so we just encourage people to cut the line if you catch one, because otherwise you end up tugging on its guts, and that's not good for the hellbender. But that's all I really have. And a lot of people to thank: Cassie and the Nature Conservancy, Indiana DNR, and a lot of our other partners.
Thank you, Nick. Great presentation. And I'm going to save the story for the end if we have time. I want to move on to Alan Purcell. He is our Director of Forest Conservation in Indiana. He's been with the Nature Conservancy as of last year, 25 years. And I remember many years ago, Alan telling me he hoped to see alligator snapping turtles in Indiana in his lifetime. And I pondered that, and I thought about that. And I think a lot of people ponder that when we hear about things that are gone, actually potentially coming back to Indiana. So I want to turn it over now to Alan to talk about the alligator snapping turtle and how he sees it being brought back home to Indiana. Alan?
Great. Thank you, Cassie. So let me see if I can launch my screen here, and let's see what we can see. That doesn't look right. You tell me, Cassie.
I see it. It looks good.
All right. I'm glad to hear that. All right. So so I'm not unlike the previous speakers on this on tonight's TNC TV. I'm not a herpetologist or somebody that knows a lot about reptiles and amphibians. I'm a forester by training, but I have wide interests. And one of my career goals, actually I have 3 career goals. And one of my career goals from way back was to return the alligator snapping turtle to the state of Indiana. It's not very often that one might get the chance to bring an apex predator back to a state. But I think that probably this is our best chance. If we're ever to bring back a top predator to our state, this is probably where we can strike and actually make it work. So I want to talk tonight about the alligator snapping turtle. which is the largest freshwater turtle thought to be in the world. And so I want to introduce you to this animal if I can. So let me see if I can get it to advance here. Look right. Did it advance, Cassie?
It did not.
All right. Let's see what we can do here then. Okay.
I'll tell you when I see it advance.
Yeah, so we had this trouble before we got started here tonight. So let's see. How about that?
Not yet. No. Oh, there we go. There we go. Yeah.
Saw Nick shaking his head yes, and you shaking your head no. So
Delay on my end.
There's a delay on your end. So let me first start out by teaching you how to identify an alligator snapping turtle. So this is not an alligator snapping turtle that you see before you hear. This is the common snapping turtle. So this is the one that we would see, in the springtime, moving from pond to pond. You might see it cross a road as it's trying to move from place to place, or you'll see them occasionally be caught by fishermen in a farm pond. But they're big animals. Nevertheless, they are a large animal, and they're a big predator. But if by looking at this animal here, you'll notice that it has a very smoothish shell, a rounded and smooth shell without too much ornamentation on it at all. Contrast that to the alligator snapping turtle. That's a huge difference between the two. Now this is a young individual here, but you can see those bony projections on the back of the animal in essentially 3 rows. And if you can imagine the back of an alligator, an American alligator, you can assume why this thing was called the alligator snapping turtle. And as the animal ages, those big bony points will somewhat subside and get smaller, but it will always have those for the rest of its life. That will be a defining characteristic of identifying this animal. One of the things that's really interesting about the alligator snapping turtle is if you look into the mouth of that young alligator snapping turtle, you'll see that what looks like an earthworm or some sort of piece of pink chewing gum or something there. That is an appendage, which is the animal's lure, which it uses for enticing unsuspecting fish to enter there and pick at that little pink appendage. And when it does, that's probably the last meal that fish will ever have. So you can imagine that animal sitting on the bottom of the stream in a really murky stream, very, very quietly waiting for a fish to come up. And as it twitches that little pink lure just slightly, the fish will come down there and nibble at it. And you can see then the power that might exist in the jaws of an animal like that. Now that's a young one. So if you look at a big one, look at the size of that animal and of the jaws that you see there. One of the things I wanted to point out here is that if you look around the eye of the animal, so here if you follow my pointer, you can see that there are small triangular projections around this eye. Those are sometimes referred to as eyelashes, but they're not actually eyelashes. They do nothing to protect the eye like our eyelashes do, but it is a defining characteristic of an alligator snapping turtle. A common snapping turtle would be smooth around its eye. In the alligator snapping turtle, you find this. But if you look at the size of the jaws on this, you'll notice that they're quite sharp along the edges here, especially on the upper edges. And as it snaps its mouth, it has a scissor-like action. In a large animal, you don't have to get very large, but an animal, as it gets some size to it, can actually be quite dangerous. There are very reputable cases of people losing fingers very quickly to alligator snapping turtles that got too close at the wrong moment in time. So this is a big animal. A few other characteristics about them are that they reach maturity in about 12 to 13 years. So it takes a little while for them to get to where they start to reproduce. The lifespans are unknown on these animals in the wild, but alligator snapping turtles are believed to be capable of living to 200 years of age, which is a tremendous age, though 80 to 120 is much more likely. In addition to that, common snapping turtles, although big, will rarely reach beyond 50 pounds. A captive alligator snapping turtle at the Shedd Aquarium in Chicago once weighed in at 249 pounds. So you can see that this is a massive animal. These are are really huge predators. And in a river system, these are the kings. I mean, they are truly the largest predators that are out there. And they're not verified. In 1937, a 403-pound alligator snapping turtle was reported from the state of Kansas. I can't imagine how big that animal was when it was eventually seen and caught. I don't know how they caught the thing, but at 403 pounds, that was big. So you can see by this photograph here that they get large. I mean, these are large animals. Now, this is from the state of Florida here. And in addition to just the sheer mass of that turtle, look at the claws at the end of its legs there. So those claws are important. They're important to keep the animal stationary. So a lot of times these animals like to get themselves wedged under log jams or root wads, and they'll persist there, probably both for safety, but also in the case of a flood, it will keep them sort of from being pushed on further down the river, and those claws can help them to stay in place plus move along. So there is a report back from the 1950s of a massive alligator snapping turtle that was seen in Japan, and it was actually caught on film and was seen for some time by many, many people. It eventually vanished, but lo and behold, it showed up again in the 1960s and was caught on film once more. Now, the important thing here to note is that clearly this is not an alligator snapping turtle. You'll note here that it has teeth and tusk, and alligator snapping turtles have neither. And so this cannot be an alligator snapping turtle, nor is Japan in the range of the alligator snapping turtle. So here's the actual range map of the alligator snapping turtle. And you can see here that it's almost neatly divided by the Mississippi River. And so this is a lower Mississippi River Basin turtle with all these Gulf coastal rivers being found to be its home too. Now, what's of interest to us tonight is that these pink reaches, the edges of its habitat, are where we don't really know a lot about the alligator snapping turtle. We don't know if they're still present necessarily, although there are historical records to tell us that they were here. We also don't know how many there are. So this is mysterious, and you can see, of course, Indiana is included in this, being the lower Wabash and the lower White River here, and the Ohio. So here are a few of the reports that have been validated. In 1887 and 1892 in Grayville and Mount Carmel, Illinois, which would be on the Wabash River, our boundary, there were reports that alligator snapping turtle was paraded around to county fairs. So it must have been something to see. I assume this must have been a large individual if it was worthy of being paraded around and displayed at fairs. Then in 1939, there's an account that alligator snapping turtles were frequently taken from Hovey Lake in Posey County, which is the very corner county of the state of Indiana. Hovey Lake now being owned by the Department of Natural Resources and is a fish and wildlife area. More recently, in 1991 in Morgan County, there was a female that weighed about 40 pounds. She was captured, but expired somewhat soon thereafter. Her shell was taken to the Evansville Zoo, but as far as we can determine, it was then lost or stolen. So the shell, we cannot recover the shell. And Cassie Hauswald, who's hosting us tonight, has looked long and hard for some of these specimens that we might validate that these things actually existed in Indiana and what their DNA might be like. And then finally, in 2012 in Jackson County, another 40-pound alligator snapping turtle was found and confirmed by the DNR. So these things show up infrequently enough and are cryptic enough that they, in the very back of my mind, they make me think a little bit about Bigfoot sightings. But something's going on here, right? Because we are seeing some sightings of these things and some captures of these things. So we are working to determine, is this animal really out there in southern Indiana, or is it not? And how does one go about looking for these things if they're hiding most of the time in murky creeks or murky rivers or in ponds at the very bottom and rarely surface for any reason? So what we're doing right now is something called environmental DNA, eDNA. And so the way this works, and this is relatively new technology, and that is that all of us are shedding cells all the time. And in our cells are copies of our DNA. This is true also for any kind of animal out in the environment, including alligator snapping turtles. Theoretically, if an alligator snapping turtle is in a particular stream, it will be shedding continuously some cells. And in those cells would be the DNA. If we could capture some of that DNA or that water, there might be cells in there that we could analyze and match them to known DNA markers to determine, is an alligator snapping turtle there? So we undertook this project. Cassie worked with the Illinois Natural History Survey at the University of Illinois to start doing some of this work. And to our great surprise, we actually had some positive results from this. And so the Patoka River actually had some hits that were positive. So these green dots you see here were where samples were taken that showed positive results in eDNA. If you ever cross this, and you might, this is Interstate 69 between Evansville and Bloomington. And as you cross this really, really long bridge across the Patoka River, it's very possible that based on these results that maybe you're crossing over the habitat of an alligator snapping turtle. We found more results just outside of Winslow, Indiana, on the Patoka River, and enough so that the Department of Natural Resources is now sponsoring a much more intensive study to see if we can find more eDNA in these creeks. Now, the trick to me, though, is despite how much eDNA we find, the proof is in getting a real animal. And so this is like maybe finding a needle in a haystack, but if we can get a real animal, or better yet, let's get a few animals, then we'll know that something's out there. So I want to stop tonight and finish this presentation by showing you this slide here. This actually was published by a Farm Journal magazine online earlier this spring. And it was an account of these farmers who decided to go duck hunting one day in Arkansas. And as they walked to their favorite duck hunting hole, it was a very wickedly cold day. And they realized that they weren't going to be able to hunt ducks because the water was frozen over. And yet as they crossed this wooded wetland, they found not only one alligator snapping turtle beneath their feet, but they found two. And I want to read you really quickly the quote from the farmer, because I can't paraphrase it in any way better than he said it. So let me just read it to you. And he said, "I was completely amazed to see this giant turtle about 1 foot under the ice, which was a couple of inches thick. Tail to nose, I'd say it was 4 to 5 feet in size, with a head that was easily the size of an adolescent human. And in that moment, I knew I'd never see something like this again." So he knew he was seeing something special. And these things truly are special. So there's one thing I want you to take away from tonight's presentation, and that is that in the last 2 episodes of TNC TV, we talked about things that you can do in your backyard to benefit pollinators and to benefit birds. And those are good things. We ought to be doing those things to benefit them. But no matter what you do in your backyard, you're never going to get an alligator snapping turtle to take up residence in your backyard. It's just not going to happen. But when you support the work that we're doing for conservation and you support the Nature Conservancy, by working together, we can protect animals like the copperbelly water snake, and we can protect the Hellbender salamander, and we can protect the alligator snapping turtle, or at least find out if it's out there. So on behalf of all of us, and all of you who are watching, thank you for doing that. And maybe someday soon, we'll solve this mystery as to whether there are actually alligator snapping turtles in Indiana or not. And if not, maybe we'll bring them back. So thank you. Cassie, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Alan. And I believe now we have a short amount of time for questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Chip for to see what questions we have in the chat. And if you have questions, please post them now.
Thank you, Cassie. We do have questions, and I'm just going to go in order. I'll start with questions about the copperbelly water snake. So Nathan, someone asks, how long do copperbelly water snakes live?
So that's a good question. No one has a good handle on it, but it is suspected that they actually probably have a relatively short lifespan. They live a short, dangerous life. They seem to reach maturity maybe in their third season. So they'll be born in August. The following August, they'll be a subadult. And then perhaps at the 2.5-year-old or so, they'll be of breeding age. So between 2.5 and 3.5 years old. And I personally have seen snakes go from being a subadult that is 200 grams and maybe 45 or 50 centimeters to an adult that is nearly a meter in length and close to 800 grams in one season, essentially. And so that indicates a pretty fast growth rate. And we also see that we had those big snakes like that, like the one at the beginning of my presentation was a large female. They also had a higher rate of mortality than other snakes. And so it's suspected that they grow pretty quickly. They reproduce in maybe 5 to 8 years, on the good end, maybe 8 years. So you maybe just get about 3 or 4 years of reproduction out of these guys, or 2 to 4 years of reproduction out of them. But nobody really knows exactly how long.
All right, thank you. Nathan, you talked about all the habitat restoration going on at Douglas Woods to make it fit for the copperbelly water snake. Now, what's it going to take to get the copperbelly water snakes at Douglas Woods? Are they going to find it on their own, or will it take reintroduction? What's going to happen?
It'd be unlikely that the snake would find it on its own. The nearest known colony is 15 miles to the northeast, in Ohio and Michigan, and there's a lot of ag land in between here and there, and a lot of roads. The snakes do roam a bit, but they don't roam that much. They generally do not cross roads. Bruce Kingsbury's work out of IPFW or PFW has shown that they actively avoid roads. I have seen snakes crawl up to roads and turn around and go back, a telemetered snake, on multiple occasions. So it's unlikely that they'd find it. It would have to be some sort of experimental repatriation. And there's been talk of that, but there's a lot of hurdles to a project like that just don't really make it feasible right now. But that said, keeping in mind the habitat of the snake, the requirements of the snake, that puts us in a good place, a good mindset when we talk about managing habitat at Douglas Woods, because we're thinking about more than just a snake with that approach.
All righty, great, thank you. Nick, we have a few questions about the Hellbender salamander. And the first question for you is, can Hellbenders breathe outside of the water even though they only live in water?
Hellbenders can breathe outside of water for a little while. They do have lungs, but they're not super efficient lungs. And the bigger issue would be that once a Hellbender comes out of water, they dry out pretty quickly. And once they dry out, they're dead. So yes, they can breathe, but it's not gonna last very long.
All right, and you had a picture there of a low-head dam, and someone asks, how does a dam harm Hellbenders?
Yeah, so dams do a couple of things for Hellbenders. One, and really the bigger issue for low-head dams, is that they cut off their ability to move up and down the stream. So essentially they split a population, and in small populations that can cause some genetic issues if they can't move back and forth to breed. Also, upstream from those low-head dams, depending on how big the dam is, it alters the habitat. So the Hellbenders don't like that slow-moving, ponded habitat that you'll get upstream from a dam. So for some distance upstream, it really degrades the habitat for Hellbenders.
All right. Do Hellbenders have any predators besides man?
They do. When they're small, when they're larvae and juveniles, just about anything that eats other animals in the water will eat Hellbenders. So crayfish, other Hellbenders, fish, raccoons, anything really. Once they get to adult size, pretty much the only things that will eat them are otters and raccoons. Maybe a really big catfish or a big snapping turtle might eat an adult, but for the most part, it would just be otters and raccoons.
All right. And we had a couple of questions about your reintroduction of the Hellbenders. And someone asked, what is the current survival rate of your released Hellbenders? And a follow-up question is, would you say that Hellbenders are doing better now that you're raising them and then reintroducing them?
So we're still actually analyzing the data right now, but it looks like our survival rate for the reintroduced Hellbenders varies between roughly 50 and 75-ish%, and that varies with the difference between those, whether we're raising them in those flow conditions versus the just standard aquaria conditions. So that's a good survival rate. So salamanders in the wild usually only have about a 1% survival rate. So the 50 to 75% is pretty good. And that should be, if we keep these reintroductions up, then that should be, barring other environmental issues, that should be a good enough survival rate to restore the population eventually. They are definitely doing better just with that 50 to 75% survival. They are definitely doing better than they would have if we had not done anything, because at least in Indiana, the population had gotten so low that they really rarely adults rarely come into contact with each other to breed. So we've been looking for nests in Indiana since about 2012, 2013, and we found one in 2015, and then we didn't find one for about 4 or 5 years until last year. We found a single nest, and they're just hard to find in Indiana at this point. We get most of our eggs from Ohio and Kentucky, where they still have a couple of streams they know you can find eggs regularly.
All right, great. Thank you, Nick. Alan, moving on to you. You mentioned that the alligator snapping turtle is an apex predator. Could you elaborate on just what an apex predator is?
Yeah, so if you move up the food chain, there would be consumers, of course, at the bottom that are consuming plant life and all sorts of microorganisms and macroinvertebrates and all sorts of things. But as you move up, you get into predators. But even further than at the very top, there would be an apex predator. So the apex of the triangle, or the peak there, the very top, there would be a top predator. And that top predator then would be the alligator snapping turtle. And by that, what we really mean is that once that turtle reaches a certain size, it's nearly invincible to anything else in its environment. Now, of course, we know in this case, humans are the real apex predator, but in a natural situation, those turtles would be fairly secure from any other predator in their environment.
All right. And can you, what do snapping turtles eat? What is on their diet?
Yeah, so as far as I know, that they're somewhat omnivorous, and that is that they're opportunistic. They will eat basically anything that will come across their path and into the zone of their mouth. There are reports even in Florida of alligator snapping turtles eating small alligators, and so they'll eat just about whatever they can get.
All right, and Alan, I'm going to end the Q&A with probably the best question of the night, and could alligator snapping turtles eat Asian carp?
I don't know the answer to that. We can hope, right?
I think you need to hypothesize here.
That would be a compelling reason to bring them back, right? So let's assume that yes, at least to some extent, they would get some Asian carp as part of their diet. How much impact they would have, I think unknown. One would surmise, though, that based on how many Asian carp there are in the far south, where there are more alligator snapping turtles, they probably don't eat enough.
Yeah. All right. Well, we can dream.
Yep.
All right, Melissa, that's the end of the Q&A. And you're on mute.
Oh, thank you so much, Chip. We had almost a flawless night there. Before everybody goes, though, we want to ask a couple of, actually 3 quick questions here. So here comes a poll for all of you. Please just take a moment to answer the 3 questions in the poll. and we'll share the results with everybody.
Can I answer, Melissa? I'm kind of biased.
Of course.
All right.
Everybody.
Melissa, I think you need to restart the poll.
Okay.
It got closed. There we go.
Oh yeah, the results are coming in. Oh yeah, keep it coming. It's better than the voice, seeing the live results. Oh, Elaine, Emmy, you don't see the question? We're asking, was it freaky, fascinating, or fabulous? What are you looking forward to hearing about trees? And please rate the session tonight on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being awesome. Okay, everybody, we're going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here's the results. Okay, when we asked what word best describes the animals featured tonight, freaky, fascinating, fabulous. Wow, such amazing creatures, really. I mean, I learned a lot. That was just wonderful. Next, we wanted to know, we've got our presentation coming up on Thursday, May 21 at 7 p.m. on trees. We want to know, what are you most interested in learning about? Tree identification, what trees to plant and how to properly plant them. The number one answer is wildlife that depends on trees. That's really cool. You guys are digging the wildlife. We are happy to tell you about that and more. And then tonight, oh man, 81% found tonight's presentation awesome. And nobody rated it lower than pretty good. I have to agree. I have to say, this was really a great presentation tonight. I can't thank the presenters enough. Went flawlessly, but most of all, thanks to all of you for tuning in. We hope you come back on Thursday, May 21 for our last presentation of the spring series of TNC TV. Thanks, everybody. Good night.